The security agent grabbed my wrist at gate 47, his grip firm but not painful. His badge read Officer Chen, and when he leaned close, his whisper sent ice through my veins. "Pretend I'm arresting you. Your life depends on it." I nodded, tears already streaming down my face, though not from fear of him. From the relief that someone finally had seen what I couldn't say out loud. That the man waiting at baggage claim in Manila wasn't my fiancé coming to marry me. He was my executioner. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Rebecca Torres and I'm 28 years old, though on that Tuesday morning at San Francisco International Airport, I felt about 100. I'd been awake for 36 hours straight, my stomach twisted in knots that no amount of ginger tea could settle. My carry-on bag felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds even though I'd packed light. Just essentials for what was supposed to be my new life in the Philippines with Marcus, the man I'd met online 14 months ago, and fallen desperately, stupidly in love with. The fluorescent lights of the terminal buzzed overhead as I made my way through the pre-boarding area. My phone kept lighting up with messages from Marcus. "Can't wait to see you, baby. Just a few more hours. Everything is ready for you here. Our whole life is waiting." Each message should have filled me with excitement. Instead, they made my hands shake. I'd ignored so many red flags. Looking back now, I can see them clearly, like highway warning signs I'd deliberately driven past. But when you're lonely, when you've spent 3 years grieving the loss of your parents in a car accident, when your younger sister is your only family and she's busy building her own life across the country, you become vulnerable in ways you never imagined possible. Marcus had entered my life through a travel photography group on social media. His pictures of Philippine sunsets and hidden beaches were stunning, and his comments on my own amateur photography were kind and insightful. We started messaging privately, then video calling, then talking for hours every single night. He was 34, worked in import-export, and had lost his own parents young. We had so much in common, or so I thought. The relationship escalated quickly. Within 3 months he was calling me his soulmate. Within 6 months he proposed during a video call, holding up a ring he promised to give me in person. Within 9 months, he'd convinced me to quit my job as a dental hygienist in Portland, sell most of my belongings, and buy a one-way ticket to Manila. He said we'd get married there, that his family was thrilled to meet me, that he'd already rented us a beautiful apartment overlooking the bay. My sister Natalie had been the only voice of caution. "Becca, you've never met him in person. You don't know his family. You don't even have their address. This is insane." But I dismissed her concerns as jealousy or overprotectiveness. I was 28, not 18. I could make my own decisions. I told her she was being paranoid, that she didn't understand what Marcus and I had. The last conversation we'd had before I left for the airport had ended in a screaming match. She'd begged me not to go, even offered to buy me a round-trip ticket instead so I could come home if things went wrong. I told her she was trying to sabotage my happiness because she couldn't stand seeing me move on after our parents died. The hurt in her eyes still haunted me. Now, standing in the airport terminal with my boarding pass in hand, I felt the full weight of every ignored warning. It had started small, just little inconsistencies that I'd explained away. Marcus's video calls always seemed to be from the same location, even though he claimed to travel constantly for work. When I suggested we video chat with his family, he always had an excuse. His mother was sick, his brother was out of the country, his internet was too slow for group calls. Then there was the money. He'd never directly asked me for cash, which had made me feel secure that this wasn't a typical romance scam. But he'd mentioned his business hitting a rough patch, how stressed he was about making rent on our new apartment. I'd offered to help, sending him $3,000 from my savings to cover the deposit and first month's rent. He'd been so grateful, so loving. 2 weeks later, there was an emergency with his import business. Customs fees he couldn't cover. Another $2,000. Then his mother's medical bills. Another $1,500. I'd sent it all, telling myself it was an investment in our future together. We were partners. What was mine was his. That's what love meant, didn't it? Sacrifice? But 3 days ago something had shifted. I'd been video chatting with Marcus when I heard a woman's voice in the background speaking rapid Tagalog. When I asked who it was, Marcus had frozen for just a fraction of a second before saying it was his landlady. But the voice had sounded young, intimate, the way you speak to someone you're close to. I'd pushed the suspicion down, but it had lodged in my chest like a splinter. Then yesterday, while scrolling through social media one last time before my flight, I'd seen a post in a travel safety group. A woman warning about romance scams targeting Western women, specifically mentioning a man who used photos of Philippine beaches and claimed to work in import-export. The details were eerily similar to my situation, but the post was vague enough that I convinced myself it was just a coincidence. The poster hadn't named names or shared photos. Still, I'd sent the post to Natalie with a simple message asking what she thought. She'd called me immediately, begging me one more time not to get on that plane. "Becca, please. Something about this whole thing feels wrong. Just wait. Come visit me in Boston instead, and we can figure this out together. If Marcus really loves you, he'll understand you needing more time." But I'd already quit my job, already given up my apartment, already told everyone I was moving to the Philippines to marry the love of my life. The shame of admitting I might have made a terrible mistake felt worse than the fear of what might be waiting for me in Manila. So I told Natalie I'd be fine, that she was worrying over nothing, and hung up. Now, in the harsh light of the airport terminal, I pulled out my phone and looked at Marcus's most recent photo. He was handsome in a generic way, with dark hair and a broad smile. But as I studied the image, I realized I couldn't quite remember the sound of his voice or the exact color of his eyes. We'd video chatted hundreds of times, but the memories felt slippery, like trying to hold water in my hands. My boarding group was called. I stood up, legs shaking, and joined the line of passengers shuffling toward the gate. A family with young children stood in front of me, the parents juggling car seats and diaper bags while their toddler sang off-key. Behind me, a businessman typed furiously on his laptop, trying to finish one last email before the flight. Normal people doing normal things while I walked toward what might be the biggest mistake of my life. As I handed my boarding pass to the gate agent, a man in an airport security uniform appeared at my elbow. Officer Chen, according to his badge. He was in his early 40s, with kind eyes that crinkled at the corners and an expression of professional concern. "Miss Torres," he said quietly, "I need you to step aside with me for a moment." My heart hammered. Had something happened? Was there a problem with my ticket? "Is everything okay?" "Just a routine security check," he said, but something in his tone told me it was anything but routine. He guided me away from the boarding line to a quiet corner near the windows overlooking the runway. Other passengers glanced at us curiously before returning to their phones and books. Officer Chen positioned himself so his back was to the gate, blocking me from the view of the other passengers. Then he leaned in close and said those words that would save my life. "Pretend I'm arresting you. Your life depends on it." I stared at him, confused and terrified. "What? I don't understand." "I'm going to put handcuffs on you," he continued in that same quiet, urgent tone. "You're going to cry and look distressed, which I don't think will be difficult. But you need to trust me right now. The man waiting for you in Manila is not who you think he is." The world tilted sideways. "How do you know about Marcus?" "Your sister filed a report with our human trafficking task force yesterday. She sent us everything, screenshots of your conversations with this man, the money transfers, the timeline of your relationship. Miss Torres, you're not going to marry your fiancé. You're walking into a trafficking operation." The words hit me like a physical blow. I grabbed the window ledge to keep from falling, my vision swimming. No, that's not possible. Marcus loves me. We're getting married." Officer Chen's expression was infinitely sad. "Rebecca, may I call you Rebecca? The man you've been talking to isn't named Marcus. We've identified him as part of a syndicate that targets vulnerable Western women online. They build relationships, gain trust, take whatever money they can, and then when the women arrive in the Philippines, they're sold into forced labor or worse. Your sister potentially saved your life by making that call." I thought I might vomit right there on the airport floor. All those video calls, all those declarations of love, all those plans for our future together. It had all been a performance, a trap I'd walked into willingly. But we video chatted. I saw him. I talked to him. Did you always video chat at the same time of day? Did he ever show you different locations, Introduce you to real friends or family members you could verify? Officer Chen asked gently. I thought back through months of conversations and realized with growing horror that every call had been at night, Philippine time, and Marcus had always been in the same dim room with the same neutral wall behind him. He'd claimed it was his home office, but I'd never seen any other part of his house. Never met anyone who could confirm his identity. Never had any interaction with him that couldn't have been carefully staged. I'm so stupid, I whispered, tears starting to stream down my face. Real tears now, not pretend ones. I'm so incredibly stupid. You're not stupid, Officer Chen said firmly. You're human. These people are professionals. They know exactly how to manipulate emotions, how to identify vulnerable targets, how to make themselves seem trustworthy. This isn't your fault.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story.
He pulled out a pair of handcuffs, and I saw several passengers near the gate turn to stare. I'm going to cuff you now. It's going to look like an arrest. We need whoever might be watching to think you've been detained for a legitimate reason. We don't want to tip off the trafficking network that we're onto them. As the metal closed around my wrists cold and heavy, I let myself sob. Let the other passengers think I was a criminal being dragged away. Because the truth was so much worse. I was a fool who'd nearly gotten herself killed or worse because she was too proud and too lonely to listen to the people who actually loved her. Officer Chen guided me away from the gate, through a door marked Authorized Personnel Only, and into a small office behind the scenes of the airport. Inside, 2 other people were waiting. A woman in a dark suit introduced herself as Agent Maria Santos from Homeland Security Investigations, and a man in casual clothes who said his name was Detective Park from the San Francisco Police Department. Rebecca, I'm so sorry this is happening to you, Agent Santos said as Officer Chen removed the handcuffs. But I want you to know you're safe now. We've been investigating this trafficking ring for 8 months. Your sister's call yesterday gave us the final piece we needed to confirm our suspicions. She opened a laptop and turned it toward me. On the screen was a spreadsheet with dozens of names, photos, and case details. I recognized the same beach photos Marcus had sent me, but attached to different names and different women's stories. Sarah from Australia, who disappeared in Manila 2 years ago. Jessica from Canada, whose family was still searching for her. Emma from the UK, who'd been recovered from a forced labor camp 6 months ago. This is the same man? I asked, pointing at the photos. He used these same pictures with all these women? The photos are of a Filipino model who likely has no idea his images are being stolen, Detective Park explained. The person you've been talking to is probably part of a team. They run multiple operations simultaneously, targeting different women with the same scripts and techniques. I felt like I was going to be sick. What would have happened if I'd gotten on that plane? Agent Santos exchanged a glance with Detective Park. Based on what we've seen in other cases, someone would have met you at the airport, probably claiming to be Marcus or a family member. They would have taken you to what they said was your new home. Within a day or 2, your passport would have disappeared. You would have been told you owed money for the apartment, for wedding expenses, for various fees. When you couldn't pay, they would have forced you to work either in illegal labor operations or in the sex trade. Some women are held for years. The room spun around me. I put my head between my knees, trying to breathe. All those months of planning my perfect new life, and I'd actually been planning my own nightmare. Your sister saved you, Officer Chen said, crouching down beside my chair. She wouldn't give up, even when you pushed her away. She called every law enforcement agency she could find until someone listened. That kind of love is rare. I thought about my last conversation with Natalie, the terrible things I'd said to her. How I'd accused her of being jealous and controlling. How I'd told her she didn't understand real love, when all along she'd been showing me the truest kind of love there was, the kind that persists even when it's rejected, the kind that fights for someone even when they don't want to be saved. I need to call her, I said, my voice breaking. I need to tell her I'm sorry. I need to tell her she was right about everything. Agent Santos handed me a phone. Take all the time you need. I dialed Natalie's number with shaking fingers. She answered on the first ring, her voice frantic. Becca? Oh my God, Becca, where are you? Are you okay? They told me they were going to intercept you. but I've been going crazy waiting to hear. I'm okay, I managed to say through my tears. Nat, I'm so sorry. You were right. You were right about everything, and I was too stubborn and stupid to listen. You're not stupid, she said, and I could hear her crying too. You're just human. And you've been through so much. I'm just so grateful you're safe. That's all that matters. I said terrible things to you. I know. And I forgive you. Sisters fight. It's what we do. But we also protect each other. Even when we're being idiots. She laughed through her tears. God, Becca, I was so scared. I kept thinking about what could happen to you over there. And I couldn't just sit back and let it happen. How did you know to call the trafficking task force? After our fight, I couldn't sleep. I kept going through everything you told me about Marcus, and it all just felt wrong. So I started researching romance scams and trafficking operations. I found forums where people shared stories about similar situations. Then I found a news article about a task force at SFO that worked specifically on international trafficking cases. I called them at 3 a.m, and basically wouldn't hang up until someone agreed to look into it. I closed my eyes, overwhelmed by gratitude and shame in equal measure. I don't deserve you. Stop it. You're my sister. You're stuck with me whether you deserve me or not. Shipa. I looked at Agent Santos, who nodded encouragingly. Now I help them with their investigation. And then I figure out how to put my life back together. My apartment is gone, my job is gone. I don't even know where I'm going to live. You're coming to Boston, Natalie said immediately, her voice brooking no argument. I have a spare room. It's tiny and you'll have to share a bathroom with me, and my roommate's cat keeps trying to sleep in the closet. But it's yours for as long as you need it. We'll figure out the rest together. Fresh tears spilled down my cheeks, but these were different. These were tears of relief, of gratitude, of the bone-deep exhaustion that comes after surviving something you didn't even know you needed to survive. Okay, I whispered. Okay, I'll come to Boston. After I hung up, Agent Santos spent 2 hours walking me through everything they knew about the trafficking operation. They showed me evidence of other women who'd been targeted, techniques the scammers used to build trust and create urgency, the psychological manipulation tactics that made victims feel like they couldn't back out even when red flags appeared. The hardest part for most victims is accepting that none of it was real, Agent Santos explained. The person you fell in love with doesn't exist. The relationship was a fiction designed to exploit you. That's a unique kind of grief. She was right. Sitting in that office, looking at the evidence of Marcus's deception, I felt like I was mourning a death. The future I'd imagined was gone. The man I'd loved never existed. Even the version of myself who believed in that love felt like a stranger now. But I was alive. I was safe. And I had a sister who loved me enough to fight for me even when I didn't want to be fought for. Detective Park drove me back to my old neighborhood in his unmarked car. My apartment had already been rented to someone else, but my former landlord had kept a few boxes of my things in storage, items I'd left behind when I thought I was moving to my new life. We loaded them into the car, and I stared out the window at streets I'd thought I'd never see again. What you're feeling right now is normal, Detective Park said as we drove toward a hotel where the task force had arranged for me to stay temporarily. Shame, embarrassment, anger at yourself. But I want you to remember something. The person who should feel shame is the criminal who targeted you, not you for being human enough to want love and connection. I nodded, but the shame still sat heavy in my chest. How could I have been so blind? How had I convinced myself that an online relationship with someone I'd never met in person was worth giving up my entire life? That night in the hotel room, I couldn't sleep. I kept pulling up the messages from Marcus on my phone, reading through months of conversations with new eyes. Now I could see the manipulation clearly. How he'd love-bombed me early in the relationship, overwhelming me with attention and affection. How he'd gradually isolated me from friends and family, subtly criticizing my relationships with others while positioning himself as my only real source of support. How he'd created urgency around my move to the Philippines, making me feel like if I didn't commit fully and quickly, I'd lose him forever. Every tactic was textbook manipulation, and I'd fallen for all of it. Around 2 a.m, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. My heart seized with panic, thinking somehow Marcus had found out I hadn't boarded the plane. But when I opened it, the message was from Officer Chen. Just checking in. I know this kind of night is rough. Remember, you survived something today that many people don't survive. That takes strength even if it doesn't feel like it right now. The road ahead won't be easy, but you're not walking it alone. I stared at that message for a long time, then typed back a simple thank you. His response came quickly. We're going to need your help building the case against these traffickers. It won't be pleasant going through all the details of how they deceived you. But every piece of information you provide could help save another woman. Think about it. No pressure. I thought about Sarah from Australia and Jessica from Canada and Emma from the UK. I thought about all the women in that spreadsheet whose names I didn't know, whose fates were still uncertain. I thought about some other lonely, grieving woman out there right now, talking to her own version of Marcus, believing in a future that was really a trap. I typed back, I'll do whatever you need. When do we start? Tomorrow. Get some sleep if you can. This is going to be a marathon, not a sprint. But I couldn't sleep. Instead, I spent the rest of the night going through every message, every photo, every video call I'd had with Marcus, looking for details that might help the investigation. Times he'd mentioned other women or business associates. Background sounds that might give away his real location. Anything that could help Agent Santos and Detective Park track down the people behind this operation. By the time the sun came up, I had filled a dozen pages in the hotel notepad with notes and observations. My eyes burned with exhaustion, but I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Purpose. Maybe I couldn't undo my own mistakes, but I could help make sure no one else fell into the same trap. Over the next 2 weeks, I worked closely with the trafficking task force. They had me record video messages that looked like I'd arrived safely in Manila, which they planned to use to draw out the traffickers. They had me provide details about the money I'd sent, helping them trace the financial networks. They even had me identify voice patterns from the video calls I'd had with Marcus, which their analysts compared to recordings from other victims. The work was exhausting and emotionally brutal. Every day, I had to confront my own gullibility and desperation. But every day, Agent Santos reminded me that what I was doing mattered, that the information I was providing was building a case that could shut down this entire operation. Natalie flew out to San Francisco to help me pack up the last of my belongings and drive with me cross-country to Boston. It was a 4-day trip that gave us plenty of time to talk, to cry, to start rebuilding the bridge I'd nearly burned between us. I thought I'd lost you, she admitted as we drove through Nevada, the desert landscape stretching endlessly on either side of the highway. When you stopped returning my calls, when you cut me out of your life completely, I thought that was it. That I'd never get my sister back. I'm sorry, I said for what felt like the 100th time. I don't know how to make up for shutting you out like that. You don't have to make up for anything. You just have to promise me something. She glanced at me from the driver's seat. Promise me that next time life gets hard, next time you're lonely or scared or confused, you'll talk to me instead of shutting me out. I can't help you if you won't let me in. I promise, I said, and I meant it. We spent our nights in cheap motels, eating takeout and watching bad TV, slowly finding our way back to the easy companionship we'd had before our parents died, before grief had sent me spiraling into the arms of a predator disguised as a prince. When we finally arrived in Boston, Natalie's apartment was exactly as she described it. Tiny, cluttered, and absolutely perfect. Her roommate Maya welcomed me with homemade cookies and an enthusiastic lecture about the best coffee shops in the neighborhood. The cat, a massive orange tabby named Professor Whiskers, immediately claimed my suitcase as his new throne. Welcome home, Natalie said, showing me the small bedroom that would be mine. It had a twin bed, a rickety desk, and a window that looked out over a busy street. It was nothing like the life I'd imagined for myself. No Philippine beaches, no romantic sunset wedding, no grand adventure in a foreign land. It was so much better because it was real. Agent Santos called 2 months after I moved to Boston. We've made arrests, she said, barely containing her excitement. Your information helped us track down 3 members of the trafficking ring, including the person you knew as Marcus. His real name is Carlos Mendoza, and he's been running these operations for 5 years. We've identified 23 women he targeted, and we're working with international partners to locate the ones who are still missing. My hand shook as I absorbed this news. Did they hurt anyone? The women they took. Some of them, yes. But because of your cooperation, we were able to move fast enough to prevent others from getting on planes. You helped save lives, Rebecca. I need you to understand that. After we hung up, I sat on my narrow bed in my tiny Boston bedroom and cried. Not just for myself and the nightmare I'd narrowly escaped, but for all the women who hadn't been as lucky. For the Sarahs and Jessicas and Emmas who believed in love and found horror instead. But I also cried with relief. 'Cause I was alive. Because I was safe. Because my sister had refused to give up on me even when I'd given up on myself. Natalie knocked on my door a few minutes later, carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate. Heard you crying, she said, sitting down beside me. Good news or bad news? Both, I said, and told her about Agent Santos's call. She put her arm around my shoulders and we sat there together. 2 sisters who'd lost their parents, who'd nearly lost each other, but who'd found their way back through love that wouldn't let go. I'm proud of you, Natalie said finally. I know this hasn't been easy, facing what happened, helping with the investigation, but you turned something terrible into something meaningful. I just did what anyone would do. No, she said firmly. Most people would have been too ashamed to help with the investigation, too embarrassed to admit they'd been fooled. But you faced it head on. That's courage, Becca. I started therapy the following week. My therapist, Dr. Elaine Marsh, specialized in trauma recovery and had worked with trafficking victims before. She helped me understand that what had happened to me wasn't just a bad relationship or a simple scam. It was psychological abuse, carefully calculated to exploit my vulnerabilities. Traffickers are experts in human psychology, Dr. Marsh explained during one of our sessions. They know how to identify people who are grieving, isolated, or searching for purpose. They know exactly what to say to make you feel seen and valued. This wasn't your fault, Rebecca. You were targeted by professionals. Slowly, painfully, I began to rebuild my sense of self. I got a job at a dental office in Cambridge, working with a kind dentist who'd been briefed on my situation and was patient with my occasional panic attacks. I made friends with Maya's book club, finding comfort in gathering once a month to discuss novels and drink too much wine. I even started dating again, though cautiously. When I met David at a community volunteering event, I made sure Natalie met him first. Made sure our relationship progressed slowly, with plenty of in-person time to verify he was who he claimed to be. Made sure I never ignored red flags or dismissed my own instincts. 6 months after the arrests, Agent Santos invited me to Washington, D.C. to speak at a training conference for law enforcement officers working on trafficking cases. Standing in front of a room full of agents and detectives, I told my story. The shame, the manipulation, the near miss. The importance of believing victims when they finally came forward. Of understanding that intelligence and caution don't make you immune to sophisticated predators. After my talk, a young woman approached me, eyes red from crying. Thank you, she whispered. I've been talking to someone online for 8 months. He wants me to move to Thailand to be with him. I've been ignoring all the same red flags you mentioned. But hearing your story, I think you just saved my life. I hugged her. This stranger who might have become another name in another spreadsheet. Trust your instincts, I told her. And never be too proud to ask for help. Officer Chen was at the conference too. When he saw me, his face broke into a genuine smile. Rebecca Torres. You look different. Happy. I am happy, I said, surprised to realize it was true. I didn't think I would be after everything. But I am. You should be. You took something terrible and used it to help others. That's admirable. He paused. I've been doing this job for 20 years, and I still remember every person I've been able to help. You'll always be one of the ones I'm most grateful for. Your sister's persistence, your cooperation with the investigation. You both saved lives. You saved mine, I reminded him. If you hadn't stopped me at that gate. I was just doing my job, but you did more than survive. You chose to fight back. That night, I called Natalie from my hotel room. I spoke at the conference today. How did it go? I think I helped someone. Maybe saved someone. I lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. It felt good, Nat. To take the worst thing that ever almost happened to me and turn it into something that might protect someone else. That's growth, Becca. That's healing. A year after Officer Chen stopped me at Gate 47, I started volunteering with an organization that helped trafficking survivors rebuild their lives. I taught workshops on online safety, spoke at high schools about romance scams, and served as a mentor for women who were processing their own experiences with exploitation. It wasn't the life I'd imagined for myself when I was packing for Manila. It was better, because it was built on truth instead of lies, on real relationships instead of manipulated ones, on strength I didn't know I had until I was forced to find it. Natalie and I still live together in Boston, though we've upgraded to a slightly larger apartment where we each have our own bathroom. Professor Whisker still tries to sleep in my closet. Maya's book club has become a cornerstone of my social life. David and I are taking things slow, but he's patient and kind, and most importantly, he exists in 3 dimensions instead of just on a screen. Every year on the anniversary of the day Officer Chen saved me, I go to the airport. Not to travel, just to stand near gate 47 and remember. Remember how close I came to losing everything. Remember how love, real love, the kind my sister showed me, can save you even when you don't want to be saved. And I think about all the women who weren't as lucky as me. The ones who got on their planes, who met their Marcus at baggage claim, who disappeared into nightmares they'd mistaken for dreams. I think about them and I renew my commitment to fight for them, to speak for them, to make sure their stories aren't forgotten. Because that's what survivors do. We survive, yes, but then we fight to make sure others don't have to go through what we went through. Officer Chen was right that day at the airport. My life did depend on pretending to be arrested. But what he didn't know, what none of us knew then, was that getting stopped at that gate wouldn't just save my life. It would give me a purpose, a calling, a reason to transform trauma into testimony. Now when I tell people where I'm from, I don't just name a city. I tell them I'm from that moment when someone saw danger I couldn't see and chose to act. I'm from my sister's refusal to give up on me. I'm from the choice to help others instead of hiding in shame. And when people ask me for advice about online relationships, I tell them this: real love doesn't rush you. Real love doesn't isolate you from people who care about you. Real love doesn't require you to give up everything you are for the promise of something you've never actually touched. Real love shows up at 3 a.m. to call law enforcement agencies until someone listens. Real love grabs your wrist at an airport gate and whispers the words that save your life. Real love drives cross-country with you to help you rebuild from ashes. That's the love worth fighting for. That's the love worth keeping. Marcus, or Carlos, or whatever his real name was, is in prison now. The trafficking ring he was part of has been dismantled, though I know others will rise to take its place. That's the nature of evil. It adapts, it evolves, it finds new ways to exploit human vulnerability. But good adapts too. Organizations grow stronger. Laws get better. People like me speak out, and people like that young woman at the conference choose to trust their instincts instead of their loneliness. Every person saved is a victory. Every woman who doesn't get on that plane, who blocks that number, who listens when her sister says, something feels wrong. Each one is a small rebellion against the people who profit from pain. I keep a photo on my desk at work. It was taken by Agent Santos at the conference, showing me talking to a room full of law enforcement officers. In it, I look serious, determined, strong. Nothing like the crying, handcuffed woman Officer Chen led away from gate 47. But I am that woman too. Both versions are real. The victim and the survivor. The person who fell for a lie and the person who chose to turn that lie into a lesson. Natalie says I'm too hard on myself, that I focus too much on the mistakes I made instead of celebrating the growth that came after. She's probably right. But the mistakes matter because they taught me something crucial. That love should feel safe, not urgent. That isolation disguised as intimacy is a warning, not a feature. That the people who truly care about you will still be there when the initial excitement fades. These days, when I can't sleep, I don't scroll through dating apps or social media looking for connection. I call Natalie. Or I text Maya about book recommendations. Or I video chat with David, who lives 3 blocks away, and could easily come over but understands that sometimes I need the distance of a screen to feel safe. I'm learning to trust again. Not blindly the way I trusted Marcus, but thoughtfully. With eyes open to red flags and ears tuned to instincts. With the knowledge that love worth having doesn't require you to ignore the voice in your head that says, wait. Officer Chen and I still email occasionally. He tells me about other cases, other women saved at airport gates around the country. I tell him about survivors I've mentored, Women who've reclaimed their lives after trafficking or exploitation. We've become unlikely friends, connected by that moment when his choice to act changed the entire trajectory of my life. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd gotten on that plane? He asked me once during a coffee meeting when he was in Boston for a conference. Every day, I admitted. Every single day. But then I think about all the things that wouldn't have happened if I had. The investigation I helped with. The people I've been able to warn. The relationship I've rebuilt with my sister. The life I'm building here in Boston. And I realize that sometimes the worst thing that almost happens to you becomes the best thing that never did. He smiled at that. That's a good way to look at it. And hey, you've got a great story for first dates. Really sets the bar for relationship red flags. I laughed because he was right. David had heard the whole story on our third date. And instead of running away, he'd said, "Well, that definitely makes my online dating history seem less dramatic." That's how I knew he was different. Not because he didn't judge me for falling for Marcus's lies, but because he understood that surviving something doesn't define you unless you let it. 2 years after the airport incident, I testified at Carlos Mendoza's trial. It was the first time I'd seen him, the real him, in person. He looked nothing like the photos he'd sent. Older, harder, with cold eyes that assessed me like I was just another transaction. But when I took the stand and told my story, something shifted. I wasn't speaking just for myself anymore. I was speaking for Sarah from Australia and Jessica from Canada and Emma from the UK. I was speaking for that young woman at the conference and for every person who'd ever been made to feel foolish for wanting love. My voice didn't shake. My hands didn't tremble. I looked Carlos Mendoza in the eye and took back every ounce of power he tried to steal from me. The jury convicted him on all counts. Trafficking, fraud, conspiracy. He'll be in prison for the next 25 years, which means 25 years of women who won't fall prey to his particular brand of cruelty. After the verdict, Agent Santos hugged me in the courthouse hallway. "You did that," she said. "Your testimony sealed the case." "We did it," I corrected. "All of us together. Because that's the truth. I didn't save myself that day at the airport. Officer Chen saved me. Natalie saved me. Agent Santos and Detective Park saved me. And now, together, we were saving others." That night, Natalie and I went to our favorite restaurant in Boston to celebrate. Over pasta and wine, she raised her glass in a toast. "To my sister, who's the strongest person I know." "To my sister," I countered, "who wouldn't give up on me even when I'd given up on myself." We clinked glasses and I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Not just happiness or relief or gratitude, though I felt all those things. I felt complete. Like all the broken pieces had finally found their way back together into something whole. The scars are still there, of course. I still have moments of panic when I see messages from unknown numbers. I still sometimes wake up from nightmares where I'm trapped in a room in Manila with no passport and no way home. I still feel a flash of shame when I have to explain to new acquaintances why I'm so careful about online interactions. But those scars are part of me now, part of my story. They remind me that survival isn't the end of the journey. It's the beginning. These days, when people ask me about my experience, I tell them about the moment Officer Chen grabbed my wrist at gate 47. I tell them about the choice he gave me, to trust him or to board that plane into nightmare. I tell them that sometimes being saved looks like being arrested, and sometimes the scariest moment of your life becomes the moment everything changes for the better. I tell them that love doesn't ask you to abandon everyone who cares about you. That real connection doesn't require you to send money or ignore warnings, or move to a foreign country for someone you've never met. That the person who truly loves you will still be there after you take time to verify their story, to check their claims, to protect yourself. And I tell them about Natalie, who loved me enough to risk our relationship by making that call to the trafficking task force. Who understood that sometimes saving someone means they might hate you for a while. Who believed that our bond was strong enough to survive even my anger and resentment. That's the story I share now. Not just the story of almost being trafficked, but the story of being loved well. Of being saved by people who chose to act when it would have been easier to look away. I keep Officer Chen's business card in my wallet, even though I have his number saved in my phone. On the back, he'd written a note that day at the airport. "You're stronger than you know. Trust that." At the time, I didn't believe him. I felt weak and stupid and ashamed, but he'd seen something in me that I couldn't see in myself yet. the capacity to survive, the courage to help others, the strength to turn tragedy into purpose. Now, when I speak at conferences or mentor other survivors or simply answer questions from people considering online relationships, I share that message. You're stronger than you know. Trust that, because we all are. We're all capable of more resilience than we realize, more growth than we imagine, more healing than we dare to hope for. We just need someone to see it in us first. To grab our wrist at the gate and whisper the words that save our lives. To refuse to give up on us even when we've given up on ourselves. To love us well enough that we learn to love ourselves again. 3 years have passed since Officer Chen stopped me at gate 47, and sometimes I still can't believe how much my life has changed. I'm sitting in my office at the Boston Alliance Against Trafficking, a nonprofit I helped found with Agent Santos and 2 other survivors. The walls are covered with photos of women we've helped, success stories that remind me every day why this work matters. On my desk sits a framed newspaper clipping from last month when our organization received a national award for our survivor mentorship program. My phone buzzes with a text from David. He's asking if I want to grab dinner after work, maybe try that new Thai place in Cambridge. I smile and text back yes, feeling that warm flutter of genuine affection that took me so long to trust again. We've been together for 2 years now, taking things slow, building something real on a foundation of honesty instead of fantasy. But even with all this progress, even with the life I've built and the peace I've found, there are still days when the past reaches out with cold fingers and reminds me how close I came to losing everything. Today is one of those days because sitting in my email inbox is a message from someone claiming to be Marcus's sister. My hands shake as I read the subject line. Please read. About my brother Carlos. For a moment I considered deleting it without opening it. Agent Santos warned me that family members of convicted traffickers sometimes reach out to survivors, either to intimidate them or to plead for leniency. But curiosity and something else, maybe a need for closure I didn't know I still needed, makes me click it open. The email is long, written in careful English that suggests it's not the writer's first language. The woman identifies herself as Isabella Mendoza, Carlos's younger sister who lives in a small town outside Manila. She says she had no idea what her brother was doing until his arrest, that the family was devastated to learn the truth. But that's not why she's writing. She's writing because she wants me to know something that came out during Carlos's prison interviews with psychologists, something the prosecution chose not to share during the trial. My heart pounds as I read her words. She explains that Carlos had been trafficked himself as a teenager, sold by distant relatives into forced labor in Taiwan. He'd escaped after 2 years and returned to the Philippines angry, damaged, and determined never to be powerless again. The trafficking operation he built wasn't just about money, though money certainly mattered. It was about control, about wielding the same power over others that had once been wielded over him. Every woman he targeted, every life he destroyed, was his way of proving he was no longer a victim. I sit back in my chair feeling sick. Isabella's email continues, making it clear she's not asking me to forgive Carlos, or to advocate for a reduced sentence. She just thought I should know that monsters are often made, not born, that the cycle of trauma and abuse perpetuates itself unless someone chooses to break it. She ends by saying that she volunteers now at a shelter for trafficking survivors in Manila, trying to create the kind of support her brother never received, the kind that might have kept him from becoming what he became. I don't know how to feel about this information. Part of me wants to maintain the clear narrative where Carlos is simply evil, where there's no complexity or nuance to muddy the waters of my justified anger. But another part of me, the part that spent 3 years studying trauma and resilience and the psychology of exploitation, understands that Isabella is right. Hurt people hurt people. The cycle continues until someone chooses to stop it. I forward the email to Dr. Marsh, my therapist, with a note asking if we can discuss it in our session tomorrow. Then I close my laptop and walk to the window of my office, looking out at the busy Boston street below. People rushing to meetings, grabbing coffee, living their ordinary lives with no idea how fragile safety really is, how quickly everything can change. My phone rings and Natalie's name lights up the screen. She calls me every day around this time, a ritual we established after everything happened. Sometimes we talk for an hour, sometimes just for 5 minutes. Today I need to hear her voice more than usual. "Hey Becca," she says, and I can hear traffic in the background. She's probably walking to the subway after work. How was your day? Did that funding proposal get approved? It did, I say, trying to inject enthusiasm into my voice. We're getting $100,000 for the mentorship program expansion. That's amazing. We should celebrate. Want me to pick up champagne on my way home? I hesitate, then decide to tell her about Isabella's email. Natalie listens in silence, her footsteps slowing as she processes what I'm saying. When I finish, she's quiet for a long moment before speaking. How do you feel about it? She asks, which is such a therapist question that it makes me smile despite everything. I don't know. Angry that she's asking me to see him as human? Guilty that part of me does see him as human? Confused about what I'm supposed to do with this information. You don't have to do anything with it, Natalie says firmly. His trauma doesn't erase yours. His story doesn't diminish what he did to you and all those other women. You're allowed to acknowledge that he was victimized, and still hold him fully accountable for the choices he made as an adult. This is why I love my sister. She has this way of cutting through confusion and getting straight to the truth. You're right. I know you're right. Of course I'm right. I'm always right. It's my most annoying quality. I can hear the smile in her voice. But seriously, Becca, don't let this mess with your head. You've come so far. Don't let him take up space in your mind that he doesn't deserve. After we hang up, I text David to cancel dinner. I need time alone to process this, to sit with the complicated feelings Isabella's email has stirred up. He responds immediately with understanding and love, offering to bring me soup later if I want company. This is what healthy love looks like, I remind myself. Someone who gives you space when you need it, but makes sure you know you're not alone. That night, I pull out a box I keep in my closet, one I haven't opened in over a year. Inside are printed copies of all the messages Marcus sent me during our relationship. Agent Santos had suggested I keep them as part of my healing process, as evidence of how sophisticated the manipulation was. Sometimes when I start to blame myself for falling for his lies, I read through them and remember that I wasn't stupid or naive. I was human and he was a professional predator. I spread the messages across my bedroom floor, creating a timeline of our relationship. The early ones are full of compliments and attention, making me feel special and seen. Then gradually the isolation begins. Subtle criticisms of my friends, gentle suggestions that my family doesn't really understand me the way he does. By month 4, I'm defending my relationship to everyone who expresses concern, echoing Marcus's talking points without even realizing I've been programmed to do so. By month 6, the financial requests start. Always with elaborate stories, always with promises of repayment, always with emotional manipulation that makes me feel like refusing would mean I don't really love him. I remember the sick feeling in my stomach each time I sent money, the voice in my head saying this wasn't normal, and the louder voice drowning it out saying that love requires sacrifice. Looking at these messages now with 3 years of distance and therapy, I can see the pattern so clearly. Every tactic is straight out of the manipulation playbook. Love bombing, isolation, gaslighting, financial exploitation, creating urgency and dependency. It's almost textbook in its precision, which makes me wonder how many times Carlos had done this before he perfected his approach. I think about Isabella's email again, about young Carlos being trafficked himself. I try to imagine what might have happened if, after he escaped, someone had helped him heal instead of leaving him to fester in his trauma and rage. Would he have still become a trafficker? Or would he have broken the cycle? But then I think about Emma from the UK, who was recovered from a forced labor camp after months of abuse. I think about the women whose names I don't know, whose fates are still uncertain. I think about the young woman at the conference who was heading toward the same trap I'd narrowly escaped. And I realize that while understanding Carlos's backstory adds complexity to his character, it doesn't change what he chose to do with his pain. Some survivors of trauma become advocates, like Isabella volunteering at a shelter. Some become therapists or social workers or artists who transform their pain into purpose. Carlos chose to perpetuate the cycle, to create more victims, to build an empire on the suffering of vulnerable women. That was his choice, made over and over again for years. His trauma might explain it, but it doesn't excuse it. I gather up the printed messages and put them back in the box, then slide it back into my closet. I don't need to read them anymore. I know what they say, and more importantly, I know what they don't say. They don't say anything true about love or commitment or partnership. They're just words weaponized to exploit loneliness and grief. The next morning, I meet with a new client at our organization. Her name is Jennifer, and she's 32 years old, recently escaped from a situation eerily similar to mine. She'd met someone online, fallen in love, sent money, and was weeks away from flying to Morocco to marry him when her teenage daughter showed her an article about romance scams that matched her experience exactly. Unlike me, she'd caught it before getting to the airport, but the psychological damage was still severe. "I feel so stupid," Jennifer says, crying into a tissue in my office. "Everyone keeps telling me I dodged a bullet, that I should be grateful. But I can't stop thinking about how I believed every lie he told me. How I was ready to leave my kids and my job, and my whole life for someone who wasn't even real." I hand her another tissue and wait for her to meet my eyes. "You're not stupid. You're human. And the person who should feel ashamed is the criminal who targeted you. Not you for wanting love and connection." These are Officer Chen's words from 3 years ago, coming back through me to reach someone else who needs to hear them. This is how healing works, I've learned. We take the grace we've been given and pass it forward, creating ripples that spread farther than we can see. "How did you get past the shame?" Jennifer asks. "How did you stop hating yourself for falling for it?" I think about this question carefully before answering. I didn't stop all at once. It was gradual, like learning to walk again after an injury. First, I had to understand the psychology of manipulation, how these scammers use sophisticated techniques that fool smart, capable people every day. Then I had to forgive myself for being lonely and grieving, for being in a vulnerable place that made me susceptible to exploitation. Finally, I had to choose to use my experience to help others, which gave me back a sense of purpose and control. Do you still think about him? About what could have happened? Every day, I admit. But now when I think about it, I don't just see the nightmare I escaped. I see the life I built afterward, the women I've helped, the relationship I repaired with my sister, the real love I found with someone who exists in 3 dimensions. The trauma is part of my story, but it's not the end of my story. Jennifer nods slowly, absorbing this. I want that. I want to turn this into something meaningful instead of just something shameful. Then let's start there, I say, pulling out the intake forms for our mentorship program. Tell me about your strengths, your interests, the things you're good at. We're going to build from there. Over the next hour, Jennifer and I map out a plan for her recovery. Therapy referrals, support group meetings, financial counseling to help her recover from the money she sent, and, eventually, if she's interested, training to become a peer mentor herself. By the time she leaves my office, she's not smiling exactly, but there's something different in her posture. A small spark of hope where before there was only shame. This is the work that keeps me going. Every Jennifer I meet reminds me that my near miss wasn't just about me. It was about all of us, every person who's ever been targeted by predators who exploit our deepest human needs for connection and belonging. That afternoon, I have a video call with Officer Chen. He's in Chicago for a training conference, but we schedule monthly check-ins to discuss cases and share resources. He's become a close friend over the years, someone who understands this work in a way few others can. I got an email from Carlos Mendoza's sister. I tell him once we've gotten through the pleasantries. She wanted me to know about his background, that he was trafficked himself as a teenager. Officer Chen's expression is thoughtful. How do you feel about that information? Everyone keeps asking me that. I say with a slight laugh. I feel complicated about it. Understanding why someone became a monster doesn't make them less monstrous, but it does make me think about prevention differently. If someone had helped Carlos when he was victimized, maybe he never becomes a victimizer. That's the million-dollar question in this work, Officer Chen agrees. How do we break cycles of trauma before they perpetuate? But Rebecca, I want you to remember something. You were victimized too, and you didn't become a victimizer. You became an advocate. That was a choice you made, just like Carlos made his choices. This perspective helps. Not everyone who experiences trauma goes on to traumatize others. Most survivors, in fact, become more empathetic, more aware of others' pain. The trauma itself doesn't determine the outcome. Our choices do. How's the mentorship program expansion going? Officer Chen asks, shifting the conversation. I heard you got the funding approved. We spend the next 30 minutes discussing logistics. talking about how to scale our program to serve more survivors without losing the personal touch that makes it effective. Officer Chen has been instrumental in connecting our organization with law enforcement agencies across the country, creating a network where survivors can be quickly linked with support services after rescue operations. "You know what I'm most proud of?" he says toward the end of our call. "It's not just the number of people you've helped, though that's impressive. It's how you've changed the narrative around trafficking survivors. You've shown law enforcement and the public that victims aren't weak or stupid. They're smart, capable people who were targeted by professionals. That shift in understanding is enormous." After the call, I sit in my office feeling the weight of that responsibility. Being a public face of trafficking survival means my story has been told in newspapers, podcasts, conferences, and documentaries. It means I can't just heal privately. My healing has become part of a larger movement to change how we think about exploitation and manipulation. Sometimes I resent this. Sometimes I want to just be Rebecca. Not Rebecca the trafficking survivor who gives inspirational speeches. But then I remember that young woman at the conference, the one who approached me crying because my story made her realize she was being targeted. I remember Jennifer this morning, finding a spark of hope in my office. I remember all the women whose names I'll never know who might have read an article about me and made a different choice because of it. That evening, David comes over with soup as promised. We eat on my couch while watching a nature documentary, his arm around my shoulders, my head resting on his chest. This simple domestic moment feels miraculous sometimes, this quiet comfort with someone who knows my whole story and loves me anyway. I talked to a new client today who reminded me a lot of myself. I tell him during a commercial break. Same age as I was, similar circumstances, that same crushing shame about being fooled. "And you helped her see that the shame belongs to the predator, not the prey," David says, because he's heard me give this speech enough times to know it by heart. Yeah, but I've been thinking a lot today about why some people who are victimized go on to victimize others, while others become advocates. What makes the difference? David is quiet for a moment considering this. He's a social worker who runs a youth crisis center, so he thinks about trauma and resilience all the time. "I think it comes down to whether you process the trauma, or whether you let it calcify into bitterness. And that often depends on whether you have support, whether someone shows you that healing is possible." That's what Natalie did for me, I realize. She showed me that I was worth fighting for, even when I couldn't see it myself. And Officer Chen showed me that I wasn't defined by my worst moment. And Agent Santos showed me I could take my pain and transform it into purpose. "You had people who believed in you before you could believe in yourself," David agrees. Carlos apparently didn't have that. But that doesn't absolve him of responsibility for his choices. It just helps us understand how to prevent the next Carlos from being created. This is exactly what I needed to hear. David has this gift for helping me sort through complicated feelings without trying to tell me what to feel. It's part of why our relationship works, why I trust him in a way I never trusted Marcus, despite Marcus's constant declarations of devotion. Real love, I've learned, isn't about grand gestures or intense emotions. It's about someone showing up consistently, respecting your boundaries, supporting your growth, and choosing you over and over again in small daily ways. It's David bringing soup when I need space. It's Natalie calling every afternoon to check in. It's Officer Chen making time for monthly video calls to support my work. It's all the unflashy, unglamorous acts of care that build something real and lasting. The next day, I have my therapy session with Dr. Marsh. I've been seeing her for 3 years now, though less frequently than in the beginning. These days we meet every other week to process whatever comes up, to make sure I'm staying grounded in my recovery while doing this challenging work. "Tell me about the email from Carlos's sister," Dr. Marsh says once we've settled into our usual chairs in her office. I notice she's rearranged the plants on her windowsill, adding some kind of trailing vine that catches the afternoon light. I walk her through Isabella's message and my complicated reaction to it. Dr. Marsh listens without interrupting, occasionally making notes on her pad. When I finish, she looks at me with that particular expression she gets when she's about to say something I need to hear but might not want to. "Rebecca, I'm wondering if this email is triggering for you, not just because it's from Carlos's sister, but because it's asking you to hold complexity that our culture doesn't usually demand of us when it comes to criminals. We like clear villains and clear heroes, but real life is messier than that." I don't want to humanize him, I admit. It feels like that would somehow diminish what he did to me, what he did to all those other women. Humanizing someone doesn't mean excusing them, Dr. Marsh says gently. You can acknowledge that Carlos was victimized, and still hold him fully accountable for victimizing others. In fact, I'd argue that's the only way we make meaningful progress in preventing these cycles of abuse. We have to understand root causes while still maintaining clear ethical boundaries about acceptable behavior. I think about this for a long moment, watching the light play across those trailing vines. It's easier to hate him when he's just a monster. Harder when I have to think of him as a damaged person who made terrible choices. Easier isn't always healthier, Dr. Marsh points out. Part of your healing has been learning to sit with complexity and ambiguity. This is another opportunity to practice that skill. She's right, of course. The early days of recovery were so black and white. Carlos was evil, I was a victim, the end. But as I've grown and learned and done this work with other survivors, I've come to understand that most situations exist in shades of gray. People are rarely purely evil or purely good. Circumstances matter. Context matters. And yet, accountability still matters too. I think I want to respond to Isabella, I say slowly. Not to absolve Carlos, but to acknowledge what she's doing volunteering at that shelter. To tell her that breaking the cycle is the most important work any of us can do. Dr. Marsh smiles. That sounds like a healthy response. One that honors your values while maintaining appropriate boundaries. We spend the rest of the session talking about other things. The expansion of the mentorship program, my relationship with David, some lingering anxiety about flying that's been cropping up again. By the time I leave her office, I feel more settled, more certain about how to move forward. That weekend, Natalie and I drive to Cape Cod for a sister's getaway. It's something we try to do every few months, just the two of us reconnecting without the distractions of work and daily life. We rent a small cottage near the beach and spend our days walking on the sand, eating fresh seafood, and talking about everything and nothing. On Saturday night, we sit on the cottage porch with glasses of wine, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. The ocean stretches out before us, vast and endless, and I feel small in a way that's comforting rather than frightening. I've been thinking about Mom and Dad a lot lately, I tell Natalie, about how their death sent me spiraling into that vulnerable place where Marcus could exploit me, but also about how they taught us to be strong, to look out for each other, to fight for what's right. Natalie reaches over and squeezes my hand. They'd be proud of you, Becca. Of the work you're doing, the person you've become. Even though the path to get here was terrible, the destination is pretty amazing. They'd be proud of you too, I say. You saved my life, Nat. You refused to give up on me even when I'd given up on myself. That's the most profound kind of love there is. We sit in comfortable silence for a while, listening to the waves crash against the shore. Then Natalie says something that's been on her mind. Do you ever wonder what your life would be? Like if that whole thing with Marcus had never happened? If you'd never gotten targeted? Never almost gotten trafficked? I consider this question carefully. Sometimes. I probably would have stayed in Portland, kept working at the dental office, eventually dated someone I met through friends or hobbies. A normal, quiet life. Part of me mourns for that version of Rebecca who never had to learn these hard lessons. But, Natalie prompts because she can hear the unspoken word hanging in the air. But I also think about the women I've helped, the lives that might have been saved because I chose to speak out about what happened to me. I think about Jennifer, who I met with this week, and how she left my office with hope instead of just shame. I think about Isabella in Manila, volunteering at a shelter because her brother became a monster. All of us trying to break these cycles of trauma and exploitation. And I realize that maybe I wouldn't trade this life, even with all its pain and complexity, for that simpler one where I never learned how strong I could be. Natalie's eyes fill with tears. That's the most grown-up thing I've ever heard you say. We laugh and cry together on that porch. Two sisters who've been through hell, and come out the other side bonded in ways that only shared trauma can create. It's not the relationship I imagined we'd have when we were kids, but it's real and deep and unshakable. On Sunday, before we drive back to Boston, we walk along the beach one last time. Natalie finds a perfect sand dollar, intact and bleached white by the sun. She hands it to me with a smile. For your office. A reminder that beautiful things can survive being tossed around by the ocean. I pocket the sand dollar carefully, thinking about the metaphor. Yes, some beautiful things survive being battered by waves. But survival requires the right conditions, the right support, the right people refusing to let you drown when you've forgotten how to swim. Back in Boston, I write a response to Isabella's email. I keep it short and carefully worded, acknowledging her brother's victimization while making clear that it doesn't excuse his choices. I tell her about the work I'm doing with trafficking survivors, and thank her for breaking the cycle by volunteering at the shelter. I end by saying that the only way forward is for all of us, victims and family members of perpetrators alike, to commit to creating systems of support that prevent vulnerable people from being exploited in the first place. I hit send before I can second-guess myself, then close my laptop and walk to the window of my apartment. From here I can see a slice of Boston Harbor, boats bobbing in the distance. 3 years ago, I was supposed to be looking at a different harbor, in Manila, living a life built on lies. Instead, I'm here looking at this view, living a life built on truth and purpose and hard-won resilience. My phone buzzes with a text from Agent Santos. She's sending me details about a woman who was just rescued from a trafficking situation in Seattle, asking if our mentorship program can take her on. Of course I respond, we always have room for one more. Because that's what survivors do. We make room. We extend grace. We pay forward the help we received when we needed it most. That night I dream about the airport. But it's different from my usual nightmares. In this dream, I'm standing at gate 47 watching other women prepare to board planes that will take them into danger. One by one I tap them on the shoulder, whisper the warnings they need to hear, watch them make different choices. When I wake up, I realize that's exactly what I've been doing for 3 years in a way. Warning people, sharing my story, trying to prevent others from boarding those metaphorical planes. Officer Chen was right that day when he grabbed my wrist and told me my life depended on pretending to be arrested. But what he couldn't have known was that my life would come to depend just as much on refusing to pretend anymore. On telling the truth about what happened, about how manipulation works, about how love should feel safe instead of urgent. The shame that once consumed me has transformed into purpose. The isolation I felt has become connection with hundreds of other survivors and advocates. The grief over the life I almost lived has become gratitude for the life I actually have. It's not perfect. I still have hard days when the trauma feels fresh and overwhelming. I still struggle with trust issues and anxiety about traveling. I still wake up sometimes from nightmares where I did get on that plane, where Officer Chen didn't stop me, where everything went as horribly wrong as it could have. But I also have days like today, where I help someone find hope in the wreckage of their own experience. Where I talk to Natalie and feel the strength of our rebuilt bond. Where I kiss David goodbye in the morning and know with certainty that this is what real love feels like. Where I do work that matters, that saves lives, that breaks cycles of trauma one person at a time. 3 years ago, Marcus tried to convince me that my life was meaningless without him, that I needed him to give my existence purpose. He almost succeeded in luring me into a nightmare I might never have escaped. But Officer Chen's whispered words at gate 47 gave me a different kind of purpose entirely. They gave me the chance to transform my near miss into a mission, my trauma into testimony, my survival into service. This is what I tell the women I mentor, the audiences I speak to, the people who read my story and wonder how to move forward after their own experiences with manipulation and exploitation. Your trauma doesn't have to define you. Your mistakes don't have to destroy you. The worst thing that almost happened can become the catalyst for the best thing that does, if you're willing to do the hard work of healing and transformation. And that work is hard. It requires therapy and support and time and grace, and the willingness to sit with uncomfortable emotions instead of running from them. It requires people like Natalie who refuse to give up on you. People like Officer Chen who see danger you can't see and choose to intervene. People like Agent Santos who believe in your capacity to help others, even when you don't believe in yourself. But most of all, it requires you to make a choice. When you find yourself at your own gate 47, whatever form that takes, you have to decide whether you're going to board the plane into nightmare or trust the voice telling you to turn around. You have to decide whether you're going to let shame silence you, or whether you're going to speak up and possibly save someone else. You have to decide whether trauma will harden you into bitterness or soften you into compassion. I chose compassion. I chose speaking up. I chose to turn my pain into purpose. And 3 years later, I can say with absolute certainty that it was the right choice. Not the easy choice, but the right one. Now, when I stand at the window of my office looking out at Boston, I don't see a city where I'm hiding from the life I almost had. I see a city where I'm building the life I was always meant to have. Where I'm doing work that matters. Where I'm loved by people who know all my scars and choose me anyway. Where every day, I get to help someone else find their way back from the edge of disaster. Officer Chen saved my life that day at the airport. But I've spent the last 3 years learning to save my own life, over and over again, through the daily choices to heal, to grow, to speak truth, to extend grace, to break cycles instead of perpetuating them. And that, I've learned, is what survival really means. Not just escaping danger once, but choosing life repeatedly, deliberately, courageously, even when it would be easier to stay small and silent and safe. Even when telling your story means reliving your trauma. Even when doing this work means confronting the complicated reality that monsters are made, not born, and we all have a responsibility to prevent their creation. This is my life now. It's not the life I planned. But it's real, and it's meaningful, and it's mine. And that's more than enough. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.